The icy winds of Velos howled across the barren plains, carrying with them a haunting lament that seemed to rise from the very bones of the dying world. Alira stood at the threshold of the cave where she had found temporary shelter, her large, luminous eyes fixed upon the leaden skies. She could sense her people's departing vessels, the hum of their engines too distant for human ears, but resonating faintly in her mind. A final shiver of displacement energy streaked across the clouds, marking the last exodus flight. Then, silence swallowed the storm's roar, leaving her alone, abandoned with only the biting cold as her companion. She had known rejection in subtle forms, but never had she imagined being thus cast aside. The elders of her race had deemed her constitution too fragile, her health too precarious to withstand the rigors of interstellar travel. They had made their choice swiftly, rationalizing that the limited life support on their ships must not be wasted on one who, in their estimation, lacked the strength to persevere. The moment was seared into her memory, cold, formal words, and the abrupt shutting of a hatch as she stood watching, tears nearly freezing upon her cheeks. Velos itself was dying. Once, it had been a world of snowy wonders, where crystal ice towers reached toward the pale sun and lush caverns of hidden flora thrived beneath the surface. Centuries of environmental decay and relentless industrial extraction had laid waste to those hidden oases, leaving behind only a tundra battered by storms and iced over by the planet's own heartbreak. The thinning atmosphere turned each breath into a stinging trial, and the sun's feeble rays offered little relief against the pervasive cold. Now, Alira found herself alone, condemned by her own people for traits she could not help possessing. Yet, in the depths of her sorrow, she clung to a small, persistent spark of resolve. She would survive, if only to prove she was stronger than they had believed. Clutching the tattered cloak that was her last gift from a sympathetic friend, she turned back into the cavern, mindful of the pressing need for shelter. Her journey deeper into the cave was guided by faint luminescent moss that clung to the icy walls, tracing out a narrow path. The howling wind gave way to dripping echoes of melting ice. Droplets tapped a slow, steady rhythm against the slick rock, creating a hush that was oddly comforting. She moved carefully, each step deliberate, as hidden fissures and razor-sharp ice formations posed threats at every turn. When Alira finally reached a natural alcove where the chill was slightly more bearable, she sagged against the wall. Exhaustion weighed upon her, yet her heart would not let her sleep. She missed the warmth of companionship, the gentle hum of her people's presence, and the knowledge that there was a plan, however uncertain, to find a new home beyond the stars. But she was alone now, on a dying planet. She gazed into the darkness, silent tears flowing down her cheeks until sleep overtook her. Her dreams were troubled, visited by the ghosts of her family and the illusions of rescue that always dissolved upon waking. When she stirred again, hours, or perhaps days later, the world around her had changed. The low rumble of a distant crash sent tremors through the cave. She jolted upright, instincts heightened by the potential for new danger. It was not merely the groaning of the planet's crust. It was something else, something metallic in nature. A hiss reverberated through the stone, followed by an echoing roar. Stalactites shook loose tiny shards of ice, sprinkling around her in tinkling cascades. Fear prickled at her consciousness. The unknown was rarely kind on Velos, where roving predators sought any living morsel. Could it be a monstrous creature awakened from hibernation? Or perhaps, on this day of improbable events, something more miraculous? Cautiously, she retraced her steps through the winding corridor of stone, peering out from the cave's entrance into the storm-racked tundra beyond. There, half buried in the snow, she saw a ship of alien design, a vessel sleek and angular, showing advanced alloys that shimmered under the battered sunlight. One of its wings was snapped, the hull battered by atmospheric entry. Smoke rose in swirling plumes, whipped by the wind. For a moment, Alira hesitated, uncertain whether to approach or remain hidden. In the end, curiosity and compassion won out. Another being, cast onto the same forsaken world, might be in need, just as she was. Her feet pressed into the crunching snow as she ventured forward, her heart pounding with trepidation and excitement. She circled the wreckage, searching for any sign of life. The crackle of electricity sparked from severed cables, forming an ominous halo of flickering light. Through a shattered viewport, she glimpsed motion. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she pressed her face to the jagged edge, her breath fogging the transparent surface. Inside, shadowy silhouettes moved, accompanied by labored voices in a language she did not understand. Summoning her courage, she tapped gently against the glass, uncertain if the craft's occupants would perceive her as threat or potential savior. A sudden hush seemed to fall within. Then, a figure emerged, wearing heavy gear that appeared ill-suited for Velos's extreme cold. The figure's face was partially concealed by a visor, but Alira noticed an unmistakable glimmer of surprise reflected in the eyes behind it. A gesture from this stranger indicated for her to move back. She complied, stepping away from the ship. A moment later, the hull groaned, and a side hatch slid open, revealing a chamber lit by blinking emergency lights. Out stepped more of the strangers, 5 in total. Each wore a variant of the same uniform, its insignias reminiscent of some distant authority. They stood there, scanning the surroundings with devices that blinked in red and green, their breath panting in the icy air. Alira trembled, fear mingled with the possibility of connection. For the first time since her abandonment, she was face to face with living souls who were not of her race. The leading stranger removed his visor, revealing the strong features and determined eyes of a man in his early 30s, with a trim beard bearing thin streaks of gray at the temples. He spoke a few words in a voice that carried an air of command and composure, but she did not understand. She answered in her own language, softly, apologetically. They stared at one another, neither comprehending the other's words, yet each realizing that survival might depend on bridging this gap. A woman among the group lowered a handheld apparatus. She fiddled with its controls, and a warble of mechanical sound emerged from it. Then, more strange words poured forth. Alira tilted her head, trying to parse meaning from the chaotic flood. At last, the device seemed to calibrate. The next statement came through as an approximation of a universal translator. Identify yourself. We mean no harm. Hearing these words, halting though they were, Alira felt a fragile hope blossom within her. My name is Alira, she replied, speaking slowly, praying the device would capture her voice and convey her meaning. I live here. Or rather, I was left behind. The man stepped forward, his expression a mixture of caution and sympathy. Captain Ethan Rains, came the reply from the translator's rough approximation. He indicated himself with one hand, then gestured to the others in turn. My crew, we have crashed here. We are in dire straits. We need shelter, supplies, a way to fix our ship or signal for rescue. Alira understood the universal shape of desperation in his tone. She glanced at the crippled vessel behind him, its flickering lights a testament to the crew's precarious situation. Without thinking further, she gestured back towards the cave. I can show you a place to hide from the storms, but it is not much, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Come. Uncertain if the translator had fully captured her invitation, she turned and began walking back to the cave. Behind her, she heard muttered debate among the humans, but soon the crunch of their footsteps on the snow signaled that they were following. Inside the cave, the wind's fury abated, replaced by a dimness alleviated only by the faint glow of moss and the humans' portable lights. Alira guided them deeper, toward the alcove she had identified earlier as somewhat sheltered. Once there, the group paused to assess their circumstances. Captain Rains looked around, removing his thick gloves to press his palm against the stone walls. His breath clouded in front of him as he exhaled. We may set up a small camp here, at least for the moment, he said in a measured tone. Velos is a harsh place, from what we gathered in our brief approach. The atmosphere is failing, the sun offers little warmth, and the storms. He broke off as another gust of wind roared across the cave's entrance, howling its agreement to his words. One of the crew, a slight woman with keen eyes, studied Alira carefully. Captain, she said hesitantly, we need to ensure we can trust her. We know nothing of her species or intentions. Alira frowned, aware of the distrust in her voice, though the exact words were muddled through the translator. I only want to help, she ventured softly. I was abandoned by my own people because I was not strong enough. But I have survived here alone. Perhaps that is worth something. A tense silence followed, broken at length by the captain's thoughtful sigh. "We are in no position to refuse aid," he said. "And so far, she has been nothing but kind. Let's keep our guard, yes, but let's accept her help." Relieved, Alira nodded. She moved toward the central space of the alcove, using what meager supplies she had gathered, small lumps of a flammable fungus that, when properly ignited, could burn with a steady warmth. At first, the humans watched uncertainly as she arranged the fungus in a shallow depression, then took a scrap of cloth and struck her metal flint against a stone to produce sparks. With surprising skill, she coaxed a flickering flame from the material. Soon, the space was lit with a ruddy glow. Captain Rains and his crew exchanged looks. The heat, minimal though it was, made a difference against the unrelenting chill. "Thank you," the captain said, a measure of sincerity shining in his gaze. "We have some rations, but not many. We hoped we wouldn't need them long, as we only came here to survey a potential trade route." Now, he shook his head in dismay. "Our ship is severely damaged. We might have repair capabilities if we can find the right materials, but we're going to need more than that. The hull is practically destroyed in one section." Alira considered his words through the translator, her mind churning with possibilities. "I cannot promise anything," she replied gently, "but there might be a chance. Some of my people's old facilities remain, outposts where they stored equipment before the final evacuation. If we could access one, perhaps you'd find tools or materials." Excitement flashed among the group, tempered by caution. "Where?" demanded a stocky crewmate. "How far? Could we get there before the next storm?" Alira cast her eyes downward, pondering. "It is many leagues to the north, in the midst of deep ice fields. The storms are fierce on that route. But if we could traverse the pass before nightfall, we might reach an old hangar. I do not know how much remains inside. Some of my people scavenged it long ago." Captain Rains looked at her intently. "We have to try," he said, determination etched in every syllable. "Our vessel has a distress beacon, but I'm not certain how long it will last in this cold. If we can repair it or boost its signal, we might have a chance of rescue." And so it was decided. The humans, battered and exhausted, would follow Alira's guidance across the frozen wastes to search for relics of an alien civilization that might just save them from an icy death. They fashioned crude sleds from bits of their damaged craft, loading them with essential supplies. Alira led the way, her knowledge of Velos's terrain invaluable. Though frail by her people's standards, she possessed a keenness of observation and an uncanny sense of the planet's hidden paths. Their journey began at dawn, the sky lit by a pale, listless sun that offered only a suggestion of warmth. The crew members braced themselves against the winds, drawing their coats tight, while Alira pulled her cloak close around her shoulders. Together, they ventured out onto the boundless tundra, their breath forming ephemeral clouds that vanished into the bitter air. Every step was an ordeal. The snow, hardened into sheets of ice in many places, forced them to use sharpened poles to maintain balance. Captain Rains and his people, used to more tempered environments, struggled with each footstep. Alira, however, guided them with subtle gestures, alerting them to hidden crevasses and ice ridges that threatened to swallow them whole. As the day wore on, swirling gusts of snow stung their faces. Occasionally, they encountered signs of Velos's former life. Massive arches carved from ice, half-melted sculptures that had once been part of a grand city, now long forgotten and consumed by drifting glaciers. The captain paused at these remnants with a wistful expression, as though imagining the planet in its prime. Still, there was no time for sentiment. The storm clouds gathered ominously overhead, and a biting wind made their progress agonizing. Whenever one of the humans faltered, Alira would pause, offering a steadying hand or a softly spoken word of encouragement that the translator endeavored to convey. She moved among them like a guiding spirit, more concerned for their welfare than for her own exhaustion. At last, near the close of day, the outpost came into view, a structure of metal domes encrusted by ice. The exterior had partly collapsed, revealing twisted supports and the tattered remnants of a once proud facility. It stood perched on a wide plateau, battered by the unrelenting wind, as though defying nature by refusing to crumble entirely. As they approached, the group took stock of the building's battered condition. Doors hung off their hinges, half buried in drifts. and the interior was as cold as the outside. Yet the walls still offered some protection from the wind, and there remained scattered crates and containers that might hold something of value. Captain Rains raised a portable lamp, surveying the gloom. "Split into pairs," he commanded, "but do not wander far. Keep your communicators on. Let's see what we can salvage. Tools, parts, anything that might help us restore the ship's functionality." Alira nodded, staying close to him. "I recall a chamber deep within, used for machinery maintenance," she said softly. "If the equipment remains there, it may be your best chance." Gratitude flickered in his eyes. "Show me the way," he replied. They descended into the facility's lower levels, picking their way through shattered doorways and corridors littered with debris. Frost glistened on every surface, lending a surreal, glittering beauty to the scene, but the cold was merciless, gnawing at their exposed faces and numbing their fingers. More than once, they had to pry open a jammed hatch using makeshift levers, and each time, the groaning metal echoed throughout the cavernous space. Eventually, they reached a room lined with rusted consoles and half-disassembled machinery. Though much was beyond repair, the captain's eyes gleamed with cautious hope. He called in the others, who began an eager search. Soon, excited shouts indicated they had found components and raw materials that might be repurposed. Alira smiled, warmed by their optimism. For the first time since her abandonment, she felt a surge of belonging. She was needed, valued for her knowledge, and though these humans were strangers, she sensed a bond forming that transcended species and language. But any relief they felt was short-lived when a distant rumble pulsed through the facility's structure, causing the walls to vibrate. Instantly, everyone froze. Another rumble followed, accompanied by the sound of scraping, claws on ice. The building shuddered, prompting a chorus of alarmed whispers. No one needed a translator to understand the peril they faced. Quietly, they began shutting off the few lights they had ignited, hoping to remain undiscovered. Yet it was too late. A thunderous crash echoed from the corridor they had traversed, and a massive shape loomed into view through the broken door. The creature was a monstrous blend of reptilian and mammalian traits, its ivory scales glistening with frost. Two luminous eyes glared at them from a triangular head, and rows of teeth shimmered in the limited light. A cry of alarm rose from the humans, and the beast lunged forward, slamming its bulk against the doorframe. Metal screeched as the entrance buckled under the creature's weight. Captain Rains raised a weapon, presumably some kind of energy pistol, and fired. A streak of light slammed into the creature's side, causing it to reel back momentarily. But the shot only seemed to enrage the beast, which roared with renewed fury and battered the doorway again. Alira's instincts screamed for her to flee, to vanish into the facility's depths, but her new friends were trapped. The creature had effectively blocked their only known exit. She had to think quickly. Glancing around, she spotted a series of overhead pipes that fed into a reservoir of volatile coolant. If they could rupture the system at the right moment, perhaps the freezing chemical could drive the monster away or incapacitate it. Shouting instructions that the translator garbled but conveyed well enough, Alira pointed to the pipes, beckoning the crew to help. Time was of the essence. The beast pounded at the door again, sending shards of broken metal flying. One of the humans, with Alira's guidance, located the control valve. Captain Rains continued to fire at the creature, forcing it to flinch away from the battered entrance. The others pried at the ancient valve, twisting it with all their might until the corroded mechanism groaned. With a final yank, the valve gave way, and a high-pitched hiss filled the air as the coolant spewed forth. A noxious, bone-chilling mist swirled through the corridor, enveloping the beast. It bellowed in a blend of rage and pain, staggering under the sudden assault of chemicals that formed an icy crust on its hide. Furious, it raked its claws at the walls, but quickly realized this environment was no longer welcoming prey. With a furious roar, it turned and fled, disappearing into the gloom of the facility's corridors, leaving scratches etched across the floor. In the deafening silence that followed, no one dared move. Then, with a collective sigh of relief, they began gathering their supplies, realizing that the outpost was far from safe. Captain Rains ordered an immediate retreat. Laden with as many salvaged parts as they could carry, they raced back through the facility, retracing their steps with anxious urgency. They emerged into the twilight of Velos to find the wind howling over the plateau, the swirling snow rendering visibility nearly impossible. Alira urged them forward, her voice cutting through the wind, guiding them by memory away from the facility and down onto safer ground. Fear propelled them across the ice fields, the monstrous roar echoing behind them as a reminder that the creature might be on their trail. It was only after they had trudged halfway back to their improvised camp that they realized just how exhausted they were. Panting, nearly numb from the cold, the humans pressed on. Alira, too, felt her limbs tremble with strain, yet she willed herself onward, determined not to fail the companions who had come to depend on her knowledge. Finally, after what felt like an endless trek across a frozen nightmare, the group reached their cave. They collapsed inside, trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. Alira worked to restart the small flame, coaxing heat from the fungus once more. One by one, the humans thawed out, exchanging pained yet triumphant smiles. When Captain Rains turned to Alira, gratitude filled his eyes. "We owe you our lives," he said quietly. "Without your guidance, we'd have never found the parts or escaped that beast." "Thank you," she nodded, a shy smile curving her lips. "I am simply glad I could help," she replied. "And I am grateful not to be alone anymore." That night, they huddled around the warmth, forging a bond deeper than mere necessity. Some shared stories of their home worlds, vibrant planets brimming with life and color. Alira listened, her heart aching with the idea that she might never see such beauty. Yet, a fragile hope took root inside her. If these humans were rescued, if they could repair their distress beacon, perhaps they would allow her to join them on their journey among the stars. The thought filled her with a cautious excitement, tempered by a lifetime of disappointment. Dawn broke cold and pale once again, but now a renewed sense of purpose spurred the group's activities. They labored tirelessly to implement the salvaged machinery and components into their vessel's battered systems. Captain Rains worked side by side with his engineer, a wiry man with quick hands named Cole. They patched damaged circuits, realigned power conduits, and recalibrated the distress beacon. By midday, sparks of life flickered through the ship's systems, eliciting cheers from the exhausted crew. Alira hovered nearby, offering whatever assistance she could, handing them tools or providing knowledge of Velos's environment. Slowly, piece by piece, the craft showed signs of revival. But a lingering fear gnawed at them all. How long would it remain functional under such extreme conditions? The battered hull was still compromised, meaning any attempt at flight might be ill-fated without further repairs. Yet, if they waited too long, the beast, or others of its kind, might find them again, or the ship's power cells could drain irreversibly, leaving them without heat or communications. Pressed by these dire prospects, Captain Rains initiated the distress beacon that evening, releasing a pulse of hope into the heavens. They waited, anxiety etched on their faces as they stared at the readouts. The signal was weak, but it was something. Perhaps a friendly ship would pick it up, or a patrolling vessel might stray close enough to detect it. Until then, they had no choice but to rely on patience and vigilance. During the next few days, life settled into a tenuous routine. Alira led foraging trips in search of any edible fungi or small game that dared to inhabit Velos's frozen caverns. The humans improved their living conditions within the cave, reinforcing the entrance against wind and prowling beasts. They found ways to siphon minimal amounts of geothermal heat from deeper within the rock, granting them a slightly warmer refuge. Hope flickered like a candle flame, fragile yet determined. In those quiet moments, Alira and Captain Rains often found themselves conversing by the sputtering fire, sharing fragments of their past. She told him of her childhood, the promise of once lush caverns now reduced to ghostly echoes, and the heartbreak of being deemed unworthy to join her people's exodus. He spoke of his home planet's rolling fields and bright oceans, of his family waiting for him, and of the longing that gnawed at him whenever he pictured their faces. A subtle kinship grew between them, nurtured by hardships shared and hopes kindled. Sometimes they would laugh at misunderstandings wrought by the translator, amused by the ways language could distort meaning. At other times, sadness weighed upon their hearts, for their futures remained uncertain, hinged on a faint signal drifting through space. On the fifth night after activating the beacon, a jubilant cry echoed from the ship. The communications officer, a young woman named Evelyn, beckoned everyone inside. "I'm detecting a response," she called out breathlessly. "Faint, but it's there." The group crowded around the flickering console, pulses racing. Through static-laden frequencies came a garbled message, confirming that a vessel had picked up their distress call. The voice was barely intelligible, but a few words emerged. Coordinates received, rescue, en route. Tears of relief streaked the faces of the crew, and Alira felt an almost dizzying wave of emotion pass over her. Could it be that after all her despair, she, too, might be saved? The captain turned to her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "We're not out of danger yet," he said softly, "but there's a real chance now. Thank you, Alira, for everything." In that moment, she realized that should rescue indeed come, she would need to choose. To remain on Velos, clinging to the memory of a people who had abandoned her, or to forge a new path among the stars, daring to trust again in the kindness of those who had arrived in her darkest hour. That choice weighed on her heart, even as her spirits soared at the prospect of deliverance. They did not have to wait long for the planet to remind them of its perils. Mere hours after intercepting the promising message, a violent snowstorm descended upon the region, darker and more savage than any they had encountered thus far. Visibility dropped to a scant arm's length, and the roaring wind threatened to tear the scant coverings from the cave's entrance. Captain Rains, unwilling to risk the ship's fragile systems, ordered the crew to power down all but the most essential circuits. They huddled around their meager fire, hearts hammering in their chests as the storm raged outside. Alira watched the swirling maelstrom from a narrow crevice at the mouth of the cave. She could feel the planet's pain, as though its convulsions were the final throes of a wounded creature. Isolating gusts battered her cloak, stinging her exposed skin, yet she remained there, transfixed. She felt caught between dread for the human's safety and an odd, melancholy empathy for her dying home world. If the rescue vessel arrived in the midst of such a storm, would it even dare to land? Through the cacophony of wind and ice, she heard footsteps crunch behind her. Turning, she saw Captain Rains approach, face shadowed in the flickering glow. He gently touched her arm. "We can't do anything about the storm," he murmured. "Come inside before you freeze." She nodded, stepping back from the entrance. Inside the dim recesses of the cave, the humans were wrapped in blankets, nursing warm drinks from ration packs. Alira took her usual spot near the flames, the heat a small but precious comfort. No one spoke much that night. Each of them knew that if rescue did not come soon, they would be forced to attempt another desperate repair on the ship or risk starving under an endless winter. Dawn broke in a pale shimmer behind roiling clouds. The storm had eased, leaving mounds of drifted snow. Captain Rains ventured outside with a few members of his crew, hoping to clear the path to the ship's access hatch. Alira joined them, her footsteps light and sure despite the treacherous footing. Together, they battled through waist-high drifts to reach the vessel. As they dug away the snow, Alira lifted her gaze to the horizon. Far in the distance, something flickered, a faint glint like a star dancing at the edge of sight. She rubbed her eyes, wondering if exhaustion had conjured an illusion. But no, the glint persisted. "Captain," she called, pointing. "Look there." Rains shaded his eyes, peering at the spot. "It could be the rescue ship," he whispered, hope battling caution in his tone. "Evelyn, can you check the beacon's reception again?" The communications officer scrambled into the ship's cockpit to examine the readouts. Alira and Rains watched the sky, breath pluming in the Arctic chill. Slowly, the sparkling dot grew larger, taking form against the dull pall of clouds. A grin broke over Rains's tired features. "It's real," he said, voice taut with relief. "They came. They actually found us." Moments later, Evelyn emerged, beaming. "They're signaling us, Captain. The approach vector indicates they've locked onto our beacon. We just have to guide them in." Cheers rang out despite the cold. Alira felt her pulse quicken with mingled anticipation and dread. The reality of leaving Velos was a step closer, yet the pang of loss for the world of her birth gnawed at her. Closing her eyes, she breathed in the biting air, determined to memorize it, to carry the essence of Velos with her should she leave. The rescue ship descended cautiously, battered by lingering gusts. It was larger than Rains's craft, sporting robust landing struts and thick plating designed to withstand hostile environments. With an ear-splitting roar, it touched down on a relatively flat expanse, blowing a swirling vortex of snow in every direction. Captain Rains hustled his crew forward, eager to greet the newcomers. The rescue team emerged, clad in heavily insulated suits. Their leader, a tall woman with sharp, analytical eyes, approached Rains, and they exchanged formal salutes. Over the wind's roar, Alira heard snippets of their discussion through a translator device. "We caught your signal. Strong solar interference. Immediate evacuation recommended. Environmental collapse imminent." Alira's heart twisted. Even the human rescuers could sense Velos's near-fatal decline. If she stayed, she would perish along with this world. She looked upon the swirling skies, the toxic winds, the endless fields of ice, feeling a deep ache for the once lush Velos she had seen only in stories and memory. Yet she also felt gratitude that she had lived long enough to see this day and to find a chance at a new beginning. Soon, the rescuers guided Captain Rains's crew aboard their sturdy ship. The battered craft that had brought them here might be salvageable, but with Velos on the brink, there was no time for elaborate repairs. The priority was escaping the planet's deadly storms. Inside the rescue vessel, the humans found warmth, medical assistance, and supplies, greeted by empathetic expressions from the rescue team. Alira lingered at the threshold, uncertain whether to board. She felt a sudden surge of anxiety, recalling the day she was left behind by her own people, the sting of rejection still fresh in her memory. A trembling overcame her limbs. What if these strangers turned her away at the last moment, deeming her an unworthy risk as her own kind had done? Captain Rains noticed her hesitation. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently into the rescue ship's main compartment. His face was resolute. "She's with us," he declared to the rescue team. "She saved our lives out there. We owe her everything." No one argued. Several of the crew nodded in agreement, grateful for Alira's vital role in their survival. A wave of relief coursed through her, tempered by disbelief that these humans, so different in form and culture, would stand by her more steadfastly than her own people. Overwhelmed, she entered, listening to the hiss of the doors as they sealed the shrieking wind behind them. Within the rescue vessel, the air was noticeably warmer, though the hum of machinery reminded them that resources were finite even here. Medics rushed about, examining Rains and his crew for frostbite, injuries, or illness. They approached Alira with gentle caution, scanning her with handheld devices. She stood very still, unsure how to react, but Captain Rains stayed by her side. That simple act gave her courage. Eventually, the ship lifted off, engines straining against the storm's resistance. Alira felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet, a rumble that rose through her bones until, at last, a new equilibrium took hold. The swirling snow outside the viewport faded into the clouds, then gave way to the star-studded darkness of space. Velos, seen from above, was a heartbreaking sight. The planet's pale surface was ringed in massive cyclones of white. Its once glistening ice caps were cracked, an entire hemisphere blanketed in swirling storms. Alira gazed through the viewport, tears gathering in her eyes. Though it had been cruel to her, though its climate had become a prison of ice and despair, it was still the only home she had ever known. She silently said goodbye, whispering a farewell in the language of her ancestors. A gentle hand clasped hers. She looked up to see Captain Rains standing beside her, sharing the view. He offered a soft, compassionate smile. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to leave home under terrible circumstances. We'll do everything we can to help you. I promise." She swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. Then, in a quieter tone, "All I ever wanted was a chance. I cannot repay you for this kindness." Rains shook his head. "You've already paid us back with your bravery. Now rest. We're safe." In the days that followed, Alira acclimated to life aboard the rescue vessel. Its corridors bustled with activity, and she discovered more humans than she had anticipated. Some were from the rescue crew, others travelers who had been picked up from various missions. The ship's labyrinth of hallways led to living quarters, common areas, and an observation deck that quickly became one of Alira's favorite places. There, She could look out at the stars, unencumbered by clouds or storms, and feel a sense of boundless possibility. Captain Rains and his crew were transferred into a series of private cabins. Alira received her own small, cozy room, an unimaginable luxury after her days of shivering in a cave on Velos. Despite her fatigue, she found sleep elusive. Each night, she lay on the narrow bed, gazing at the polished ceiling, thoughts swirling with uncertainty. Was she truly free? Would the humans allow her to stay among them? Or would she be turned over to some distant authority, her fate uncertain once more? One evening, a soft chime announced a visitor. Alira opened the door to find Rains in the corridor, bearing 2 steaming cups of a beverage she had come to enjoy, something akin to spiced tea. He offered her one, and she gestured for him to enter. They settled across from each other, the hum of the ship's engines a comforting backdrop. He cleared his throat. "We'll be arriving soon at a station called Port Solaris," he said, handing her a small data pad that displayed images of the station's exterior, an enormous ring-like structure orbiting a brilliant star. "It's a major hub. Medical facilities, diplomatic quarters, trade, everything. My crew and I will be docking to file reports, schedule repairs, and plan our next steps." She sipped her tea, the warmth soothing her throat. "And what is to become of me?" The question hung in the air, edged with fear. Rains leaned forward, meeting her gaze earnestly. "I've spoken to the commander of this ship and the station authorities. They're aware of your situation. Officially, you're a displaced citizen of Velos. Since the planet is effectively abandoned, you have no formal government or representation. But this also means you're free to seek asylum wherever you wish." "Asylum," she repeated, rolling the foreign word around in her mouth. She understood its meaning: a safe haven, a new home, a place where she might live without fear of being cast aside. "But I have nothing, Captain. No resources or skills that would matter in your civilization." Rains shook his head. "Don't underestimate yourself. You navigated a dying planet, faced monstrous creatures, and saved an entire crew from certain doom. You have more resilience and knowledge than many. The station has programs to help refugees resettle, offering training and a path towards citizenship. My crew and I will vouch for you." A trembling sigh escaped her. "I cannot express my gratitude. But are you sure? If your superiors question your judgment." He waved off her concern. "My superiors can question all they like, but they'll see reason. You're an asset, Alira, and more importantly, a friend. We want to help you find your place." A flutter of hope rose in her chest, tempered by lingering doubts. Yet she could not deny the kindness in his eyes or the sincerity of his words. Slowly, she nodded. "Then I will try. I will step forward into this unknown, and perhaps I will find a life worth living there." Rains lifted his cup in a small toast. "To new beginnings," he said, voice warm with optimism. Her lips curved in a slight smile as she tapped her cup to his. To new beginnings. True to the captain's word, the rescue vessel arrived at Port Solaris a few days later. Alira's first glimpse of the station took her breath away. A great ring of metal and glass circled a luminous star, massive docking arms bristling with ships of varied designs. Lights twinkled along the station's hull, while throngs of smaller craft darted in controlled choreography. Even from a distance, the structure pulsed with life, a testament to the collaborative efforts of numerous worlds. Alira felt a surge of awe and trepidation. This was not a single planet with a single culture, but a galactic crossroads where species mingled freely. She could not imagine the complexity of it all. Yet behind that sense of enormity, a seed of wonder took root. She had spent her life on a dying rock. Now she stood on the threshold of countless possibilities. The rescue vessel navigated to a designated bay, where it docked smoothly. After final checks, the airlock hissed open, revealing a spacious corridor of polished metal and light. Captain Rains and his crew exited first, offering friendly waves and words of encouragement. Alira followed, stepping into a world that smelled of recycled air, faintly perfumed by unknown flora. Overhead, wide skylights revealed the starry void, allowing glimpses of passing ships. They were greeted by station officials and medical personnel who performed routine scans and asked myriad questions. Though overwhelmed, Alira did her best to remain calm, relying on the translator device to communicate. She felt Rains's reassuring presence at her side, even as she answered inquiries regarding her origins and her reason for seeking sanctuary. When the questioning was complete, she was guided through a series of administrative steps that granted her a provisional refugee status. The station's immigration officer, a stern-looking humanoid with faintly scaled skin, handed her an identification chip. This entitles you to basic housing and sustenance. If you wish, you can apply for further assistance, including educational programs. We're a diverse station, they said, glancing over the paperwork. We don't turn away those in need. Alira accepted the chip with trembling fingers. This small object embodied acceptance, a chance at a genuine future. She thanked the official profusely, struggling to maintain composure amid the swirl of new emotions. Captain Rains placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her away from the bustling checkpoint. "Let me show you where we're staying," he said. "It's a small berth assigned to my crew, but maybe we can help you get settled. Tomorrow, we'll explore the station's facilities together." As they walked through the gleaming corridors, Alira's eyes roved across shops, cafes, and observation decks brimming with individuals from more species than she could count. She saw reptilian forms, avian-like bipeds with intricate feathers, and even a shimmering, jellyfish-like being that floated gracefully in a protective, fluid-filled suit. It was a kaleidoscope of life, both wondrous and intimidating. They reached a modest suite of connected cabins arranged around a communal lounge area. There, some of the crew were already reclining on couches, sipping hot beverages, relieved to have a stable environment again. They welcomed Alira with easy smiles and gestures toward an empty seat. One crew member, the engineer Cole, offered to show her how to operate the station's terminal system so she could explore opportunities. Another, the communications officer Evelyn, asked if she wanted to join them for a meal at one of the food courts. Alira felt an overwhelming surge of belonging. She marveled at how quickly these people had opened their hearts to her. Though she was of another species, her presence was met not with suspicion or rejection, but with camaraderie. After settling into the cabin arranged for her by the station's authorities, a spare but comfortable space with a bunk, desk, and small viewport, Alira took time to reflect. She gazed into the swirl of traffic outside her window, the lights of countless vessels weaving in and out of the station's docking lanes. Her life had transformed in a manner she once deemed impossible. From castaway to refugee, from pariah to friend. The path ahead remained uncertain, but at least it was hers to choose. In the following days, Alira and Captain Rains fell into a warm routine. He and his crew attended debriefings and technical reviews. Alira, meanwhile, began the registration process for an education program, focusing on xenobiology and astronavigation. She possessed an innate connection to environmental cues, honed during her survival on Velos, and her mentors believed she could develop it into a valuable skill. She also joined Evelyn and Cole on errands throughout the station, soaking up the mosaic of cultures. They guided her gently through the complexities of interstellar commerce and diverse etiquette, teaching her how to greet people of various species, which gestures were considered polite, and which foods were safe to eat. Through trial and error, she uncovered joys she never knew existed. A sweet, fizzy beverage that tickled her nose, a lively gathering where multiple species played a curious board game involving shifting patterns of colored stones, and an arboretum brimming with vibrant alien flora. Still, every so often, Alira's thoughts returned to Velos. On sleepless nights, she felt the tug of regret for not being able to help her planet heal. Sometimes she wondered if any of her people had reconsidered their decision to abandon her, or if they had even survived their exodus. Yet each time she sank into these contemplations, she recalled the searing memory of being left behind. The ache remained, but it was tempered by the kindness she now experienced. One evening, as they strolled through the arboretum's luminescent walkways, Rains came to her side. "How are you adjusting?" he asked. Beneath artificial starlight, the leaves of alien trees glowed with soft hues. Alira paused to let a tendril from a bioluminescent vine brush her arm. It felt velvety, alive. "Better than I dared to hope," she admitted. "And yet, I feel so naive sometimes. It's as though I've been thrust into a world too grand for me." "None of us have all the answers," Rains said quietly. "In truth, we're all a little lost out here." The galaxy is vast, and each new discovery can overwhelm us. But we learn, and we adapt, just as you have. That's what matters. She studied him, noticing the faint lines of worry near his eyes, the silver flecks in his hair that hinted at burdens carried. "What about you?" she asked gently. "Will you stay here, or return to your home world?" He glanced away, hands in his pockets. "I have responsibilities back home, a family waiting for me. But first, I need to see my mission through and ensure my crew is well. Our ship may be beyond simple repair. We might have to purchase or lease a new vessel before we can travel. I'm also waiting on the official investigation to conclude." She felt a pang, realizing that someday soon, he might vanish from her life just as her people did. Only this time, she hoped it wouldn't be in anger or rejection, but as a natural divergence of paths. "I see," she murmured, unable to hide a small note of melancholy. Rains touched her arm reassuringly. "But even when we part ways, we'll stay in contact. Space can be big, but not always so big that friends can't find each other again." A shy smile curved her lips. She ducked her head in acknowledgement, feeling her spirits lift. In that moment, the hum of the station's artificial breeze seemed gentler, the glow of the trees more comforting, and the weight of the past easier to bear. Time flowed swiftly. Alira immersed herself in station life, attending orientation sessions for her studies and exploring potential volunteer positions. She discovered that her sensitivity to environmental changes made her an excellent candidate for roles involving habitat management. Station officials, impressed by her aptitude, encouraged her to start training in that field. Meanwhile, Captain Rains and his crew received final word that their battered ship was irreparable. The station's salvage teams would dismantle what remained for parts. Though disheartened, the crew took it in stride, focusing on acquiring a modest vessel to take them home. Days of negotiations followed, culminating in the purchase of a small but reliable ship that would carry them safely across the stars. The night before the crew's scheduled departure, Alira found herself in the station's central plaza, a bustling hub flanked by shops and eateries. She had arranged a small farewell gathering, wanting to honor the people who had become her first true friends. With her meager resources, she could only afford some modest refreshments, but her gratitude ran deeper than any feast could show. They gathered around a circular table beneath a massive dome that allowed an unfettered view of space. Stars twinkled in the blackness, and ships glided smoothly around the station. Alira tried to fight back tears as she handed each crew member a small token, a polished stone from Velos' surface, wrapped in a fragment of cloth. She had collected them in her final hours on the planet, never knowing why. Now she understood. They were to remember her and by extension, the world that had once been her home. Captain Rains held the stone in his hand, turning it over gently. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We'll keep these close." To Alira, Evelyn said, raising a small cup in a toast. "To the bravest soul on Velos, and now, to a promising future among the stars." They clinked their cups, sharing a moment of unspoken unity. Alira's vision blurred, but these tears were of gratitude and love, not despair. Shortly after, the group dispersed. Some needed to rest before the morning launch. Others wished to make final preparations. Eventually, only Alira and Rains remained at the table, the lights of the plaza dimming as the station shifted into its evening cycle. Silence enveloped them, broken only by distant conversations and the faint hum of automated systems. Alira turned to him, her voice trembling. "Thank you for everything. If you hadn't trusted me on Velos, I'd." He silenced her with a gentle shake of his head. "We all made it together, because of each other. One day, I hope you'll visit my home world. Meet my family, see the oceans I spoke of, stand in the sunlight of a warm planet without fear. You deserve that and more." She smiled through tears. "I'd like that very much." They lingered a while, content in the quiet companionship, hearts heavy with the knowledge that the next day would bring farewells. Alira's mind spun with questions. Would she adapt to station life without them? Would her budding friendships fade? But as she looked into Rains's compassionate gaze, a realization struck her. She was no longer alone. Even if their paths diverged, the bond they had forged would endure. Morning arrived swiftly, the station's artificial dawn casting golden rays through the corridors. Alira accompanied the crew to the docking bay, weaving through busy travelers. The hum of the newly purchased ship reverberated in her chest. It was smaller than their old craft, less ornate, but well suited for safe passage. Crew members bustled with final checks, verifying cargo, and confirming flight paths. Rains stood by the entry ramp, greeting officials, ensuring documentation was in order. When at last the time came, Rains turned to Alira, the corners of his mouth curving in a gentle, almost paternal smile. "Well, this is it," he said. "We'll send you word when we reach our destination. And you must promise to let us know how your training goes. If you ever need help or just want to talk, don't hesitate to reach out." She swallowed back emotion. "I promise," she whispered. Then, in a moment of courage, she stepped forward and embraced him, a purely human gesture she had observed many times but rarely experienced. He returned the embrace warmly, the translator device unnecessary for that universal language of affection. The rest of the crew offered their own heartfelt farewells, a pat on the shoulder, a gentle handshake, a few teasing remarks about future adventures. Alira waved as they boarded, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She held herself together until the ship's thrusters roared and it lifted off the deck, gliding through the energy shield into open space. Only then did she allow the tears to flow freely, a mixture of joy and sorrow, love and loss. After the ship's distant silhouette vanished among the stars, Alira stood alone on the docking bay platform. She closed her eyes, listening to the station's background hum, feeling the pulse of so many lives moving around her. Despite her tears, a sense of peace settled within. Her life was hers, no longer dictated by rejection or survival at all costs. She was free to carve her own destiny. Over the next weeks, Alira threw herself into her studies with renewed determination. She learned about sustainable habitats, environmental control systems, and the intricacies of balancing various species' needs in a closed ecosystem. Her instructors were impressed by her intuition and adaptability, often commenting that her experiences on Velos gave her a unique perspective. As she advanced, she even assisted in minor projects, monitoring oxygen levels in the arboretum, adjusting humidity in specialized biodomes, and tracking the well-being of imported flora. Friends came naturally, as her earnest nature and gentle curiosity endeared her to others who had also arrived as refugees or travelers. She found herself in lively discussions with academic peers, forging bonds over the shared wonder of new knowledge. In casual conversations in the food court, she recounted her tale of surviving Velos, leaving her new acquaintances awed or moved to tears. One day, while Alira worked in the arboretum calibrating environmental sensors, a station courier approached her with a small data chip. "Message for Alira," the courier announced. She accepted it, heart pounding at the sight of the official seal from the quadrant where Captain Rains had said he was headed. Hands trembling, she inserted the chip into a portable reader. The screen lit up with a recorded message. Rains's face appeared, slightly older, wearing a joyful grin. He stood in the middle of a sunlit field, the sky behind him a perfect azure. A line of ocean shimmered in the background. She could almost feel the warmth of that world radiating through the display. "Alira," his voice said, "greetings from home. My family, and I wanted to show you the ocean we talked about. Wish you could be here to feel the sand and the waves. I hope station life is treating you well. If you ever get the chance to travel out here, you'll have a home with us. Send word if you can. Until then, stay safe and keep learning." His image vanished, replaced by a brief shot of bright waves lapping at a golden shore. Children laughed off-screen, the sound pure and full of life. Then the message ended, leaving Alira breathless. She hugged the reader to her chest, tears of joy slipping down her cheeks. She was no longer the forlorn girl huddling in a cave, awaiting her world's final breath. She was part of something larger, an ever-expanding tapestry of connections. That night, beneath the glowing canopy of the arboretum, she composed a reply, telling Rains of her progress and her gratitude, promising that one day she would stand on that beach and wade into those azure waters. With a trembling finger, she hit send, dispatching her words across the light years. Time continued its steady march, and as Alira progressed in her educational track, she discovered she had a talent for reconciling ecosystems under stress. In simulated scenarios where multiple factors threatened biodiversity, she demonstrated a deft hand at identifying solutions. Her mentors remarked on how calm and methodical she was during crises, a trait born from her real-life trials on Velos. Word of her aptitude began to spread among the station's environmental departments, and soon, she was offered an apprenticeship in the advanced hydroponics sector. It was an opportunity that could propel her toward a full-fledged career. She accepted with gratitude, diving into her new responsibilities. Each day, she rose early, eager to meet fresh challenges, adjusting valves and nutrient mixtures, ensuring that fruit-bearing plants thrived in artificial gravity. She worked with colleagues from myriad species, learning their cultural values and forging friendships that broadened her worldview. In return, she shared stories of icy caverns, of monstrous beasts, and of that tenuous moment when she first encountered human kindness. They listened, rapt, sometimes wiping away tears. Months turned into a year, then another. Seasons on Port Solaris were measured in rotating cycles of artificial daylight and curated festivities rather than changes in weather. Alira found stability and purpose, a far cry from her nights alone on Velos. And yet, her longing to see the broader galaxy persisted. She saved her earnings diligently, with the dream of buying passage on a starship that could take her to Raines's home world or beyond. At last, opportunity knocked in the form of a scientific expedition. An eclectic team of scholars, engineers, and environmental specialists needed an adept hand in habitat management for an upcoming mission to a newly discovered exoplanet. It offered a modest salary, and more importantly, the chance to explore. Alira's application was swiftly accepted, her track record, references, and personal story making her an ideal candidate. On the eve of departure, she stood in her small cabin, packing her few belongings and the souvenirs she had gathered, a collage of station life and the friendships forged therein. She hesitated only at the moment of removing the piece of cloth from Velos she had kept as a memento, running her fingers over its frayed edges. So much had changed since that day when the starships of her people faded into the bitter sky. She pressed the cloth gently to her cheek, a silent goodbye to the ghosts of her past, then tucked it safely into her travel bag. Morning arrived, bringing with it the steady rumble of starship engines. She made her way to the docking bay with a sense of excited nerves. The vessel designated for the expedition was sleek and efficient, different from the rescue craft or the battered ship that had brought Raines and his crew. Her new colleagues greeted her warmly, their eyes shining with the shared thrill of discovery. As the ship's ramp sealed behind her, Alira felt a stirring of emotion that nearly choked her. This was it, the next step of her journey, a testament to everything she had overcome. She closed her eyes, recalling the image of Velos from orbit, how she had once thought her life would end there. Instead, she found hope with humans, forging friendships that had illuminated possibilities she never dared dream. She placed a hand on the bulkhead, feeling the soft vibration of the ship powering up. A wide smile broke across her face. No longer abandoned, no longer defined by her weaknesses, she was ready to embrace the future and the mysteries that lay beyond. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted away from Port Solaris, setting a course for the uncharted stars. In the quiet hush of departure, Alira looked out a small porthole to catch one last glimpse of the station that had been her refuge. As Port Solaris shrank behind them, she whispered a vow, to live boldly, to care for others as they had cared for her, and to never forget the love she had found when all seemed lost. And so, with heart alight and the galaxy beckoning, Alira, the alien girl once cast aside on a dying world, embarked upon the grandest adventure of all, a life rekindled, shared, and savored among the endless stars. In the tapestry of fate, her journey was a bright thread of hope, weaving itself into the future she had always dreamed might one day be hers. And in the warmth of that promise, she found her happy ending, destined to keep unfolding with every leap across the cosmic seas.